Good evening and greetings, everyone. Well, it might not be evening for you, but from wherever time I find you in your life, it is a pleasure to join you, and I am happy that you are joining me for another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, um, well, we ran around Darkshore, and we swam around Darkshore because we took our druid and we learned aquatic form. She can become a sea lion now. Ooh, ooh, ooh. And also did some wandering of the shores. It looks like there's been a Naga attack on Darkshore, and we can draw some further ties between the old ones, the old gods, and them. Um, so that's cool. We've also been reading the Dungeons and Dragons sourcebook materials on the specifically the Alliance Player's Guide, and we've been really getting into the history and culture of the different races. We're getting near the end of that chapter. I think we've just got a couple to go. So stay a while and listen as we now jump into gnomes, our little gnomies, the Maleficents, and the other cool one of the most fun races to play as, in my humble opinion. All right, here we go. Gnome history. Sorry, but there's little to go off of for gnomish history. Hell, even the gnomes don't know much prior to the Second War, but I set forth on this project to provide information on all the races of the Alliance, so I'll give it my dwarven best. A little over 200 years ago, a dwarf explorer stumbled across a gnomish village. Shocked is hardly the word to describe his reaction. While we were still marveling at the sheer majesty of gunpowder, they had fully automated households and giant robotic chickens guarding their village. I'll be the first to tell you that our little buddies here are kinda strange. Anyhow, they looked smart, and their grasp over technology was simply astounding, so we offered them our friendship, and they gladly accepted. We even gave them a place to truly build themselves a city in our own mountains of Dun Morag, not too far from Ironforge itself. Thus the gnomes and dwarves built Gnomragon, and the gnomes came out of the woodwork. Ever since then, our two races have lived side by side. Gnomes also discovered goblins at this point, and the two races developed a mercantile and technological feud that lasts to this day. Reflected in the classic engineering specs that you can pick. We also know that gnomes and dwarves have been working abreast, side by side, since long before they rediscovered one another. They're both the children of the earthen. So we have a little bit more to go on. Sorry, I'm responding to the old Mrs. Gleecon. During the Second War, the gnomes took up arms and helped us battle the Horde. Dozens of gadgets and vehicles flooded from their workshops, and many gnomes even directly participated in the battles, often riding great flying vehicles and piloting shoddy submarines into the fray. If it weren't for the little guys, I doubt we would have lasted as long as we did, let alone won the war. We absolutely would have lost the war because one single freaking turtle submarine would have destroyed the entire alliance based on the way that game works. And then one day, the gnomes up and disappeared, withholding all their pilots and troops during the Third War. I think that was just a dev decision, which is a bummer. It blew our minds that our friends would so abruptly leave us like that. It wasn't until after the defeat of the Legion that we learned why the little folk hid from the rest of the world. I smell a retcon. It seemed that before the Third War, a great tragedy hit the gnomes' homeland. While still healing from the tides of the Second War, an army of trogs beneath Gnomragon assaulted their homeland and caught them unawares. Knowing that the rest of the Alliance had bigger troubles to do without them, the gnomes sealed themselves within Gnomragon's halls and tried to rid themselves of the invaders. Unfortunately, they lost, horribly. Only half of the remaining gnomish race was left to flee to Ironforge. Ever since then, the guys have been rebuilding their race, once again supplying the Alliance with great inventions and astounding pilots. However, Gnomragon is now uninhabitable. Their ruler, at the behest of his advisor Mechgineer Thermoplug, detonated a radiation bomb in its halls in an attempt to kill the Trogs. The only things living in Gnomragon now are insane and leprous gnomes, glow-in-the-dark Trogs, and tons of killer machines. They swear that someday they'll heal their city. I only hope they can. I mean, kind of. They're ish on the way to that. But that'd be cool. If they eventually somehow got, like, that's something they could do in a further expansion. Like, give the trolls and the gnome. I mean, with Zandalari, you kind of have a troll, but give the gnomes like their own real capital. Gnome culture. In a strange sort of way, gnomes are what dwarves would be if we had no direction. Jovial and warm-hearted, gnomes tend to treat members of other races as younger folks, taking a grandfatherly or grandmotherly approach. However, when put together, one can expect only the strange. You think exploding sheep and giant riding mechanized chickens is a little off? Then you don't know a gnome personally. Simply put, gnomes lack any ability to focus. That's the simplest it'll get. This lack of focus tends to show itself in everything a gnome does, and even the life he lives. A gnomish home, also a workshop, might I add, is strewn with thousands of little doodads, gadgets and gizmos aplenty. It's like a Dr. Seuss line. That the resident has been constructing. The floors are littered with tossed books, the tables covered in blueprints, and the gnome himself plastered in the middle of these. He'll be in the same clothes he's been wearing for a week, his hair frazzled beyond repair, and probably more than a little malnourished. Often you'll find little robots clucking around performing various assigned tasks the tinker honestly doesn't have time to do. Okay, I've changed my mind. I don't want to say the gnome cannot focus. A gnome spends entire weeks working on devices and even hires adventurers to seek parts for the next big thing. Oh, and expect plenty of explosions. Tinkering ain't often an exact science, as I've come to recognize. Gnomes do produce fewer explosions than goblins, though. Unlike their closest competitors, the goblins, gnomish ingenuity does not hold only to technological prowess. A gnome is always attempting to find the next greatest thing, whether it be a new spell, invention, or even a way to eat. They believe completely that ingenuity and design can beat any challenge and make life so much easier. Why simply swing an axe when you can have an automated arm thrust a spinning saw blade into someone's face? Why simply cast an arcane missile when you can cast Blam Blaster's super explosive homing projectile of doom and destruction? Gnomish inventions tend to reflect their personalities: flamboyant, bright, flashy, half screwed. Often Gnomish inventors organize into pairs for rather mysterious reasons that even they don't fully understand. I don't know, I think they're just basing that on what it's like in Karazhan, or not Karazhan, whatever the, maybe it is Karazhan, whatever the main little first starting town in Dun Morag is. In all my travels, I've rarely seen them alone, and they seem to have this odd crazy guy, sane guy relationship, or Millhouse and Millie, who have just a crazy guy, crazy gal relationship. One is always trying to push the limits of his devices to unknowable extremes, while the other does everything he can to keep the invention from becoming disastrous. Ironically, these pairings may be responsible for much of the race's best innovations. For instance, it was two pairings of just this type that created the Underground Railroad that connects Ironforge to Stormwind Keep. Pretty handy, if you ask me. I don't know where else they've got the idea that that pair is how it happened, unless it's those brothers that do the rats down there, but I don't think so. Gnomes do not have kings or queens, not for at least 400 years. Instead, they elect members to become officials. These men and women hold grand titles, but only hold their power for set terms of office, after which they return to the workforce. The ruler holds the seat of the High Tinker, currently held by Gelban Mekatork. While he suffered flak wounds from the release of the bomb in Nomergon, his genius is still strong enough to keep his title. He's a good man, too. I've spent more than one evening with him, simply chatting about new inventions. Gnome communities are haphazardous at best. No two houses ever look the same. And their streets meander into a maze between workshops, domiciles, and council rooms. Gnomes organize into great extended families, taking in anyone who sticks around long enough and adding them to the family. A single domicile can hold upward of 20 gnomes, and even more could theoretically be crammed in. Even to outsiders, their doors are always open and something's on the stove. Presents are common and given for even the smallest reason. Despite their oddness, they're the happiest people I've ever met. Above all else, gnomes value life and all its little eccentricities. To the gnomish way of life, one's friend is the most important thing of all. Cheery and outgoing from the onset, they approach each and every person exactly as they themselves would desire to be treated. Gnomes also love to throw parties and not just welcome back shindigs for war veterans. Their love of companionship and life is best shown in these celebrations, where loud music, bright displays of fireworks, and offbeat singing continues until the last gnome drops. The food is an experience, I'll say. Everyone brings something, making it one massive potluck. Unfortunately, each gnome applies its inventive streak to his dish, and the results can be simply astonishing. I remember being subjected to a liverwurst and raw fish head salad dip, stewed for 3 hours until brought to a thick, viscous paste. So are you telling me that gnomes designed every food dish in Shadowlands? It was an experience, and so was the next 2 hours as my body rejected the toxic stuff. I've eaten some horrendous stuff in my day, but that took the cake. The chef simply shrugged and ate an entire handful, and they say we have iron stomachs. Go hug a gnome. He'll thank you for it. And we're going to finish off today, this mini episode for our mini folk, with some gnome knowledge. What a character knows about gnomish history and culture depends on their intelligence and training, represented by a knowledge check in the appropriate knowledge arena, based at the following DCs. So, at the lowest level, where most people know this and almost all heroes with any knowledge of architecture, engineering, or history know that gnomes are master craftsmen. They fought in the Second War, and many of the inventions of the Third War were based on gnome prototypes. So a good chunk of people, and at least half heroes that have any knowledge of local or historical things, know that 4 years ago the gnomes closed the doors of their city Gnomeregan to the world and avoided the Third War. They did not appear until much later, half of their race decimated in a war they fought all by themselves. The Iron-Forged dwarves gave the gnomes refuge in their own kingdom. Now, a few people and a decent chunk of heroes knowledgeable in history, nobility, or royalty know that gnomes have not had a true king in over 400 years, and their current leader is the High Tinker Mechatork. Very knowledgeable heroes with experience in geography or history know that gnomes were nearly destroyed years ago when Trogs invaded their kingdom, and to counter this threat, at the advice of the High Tinker's advisor, the gnomes released a radiation bomb. Gnomeregan now exists as a blighted and desolate ruin. And finally, the geographical and local sages of the highest skill have a chance of knowing that not everything died when the gnomes' bomb in Gnomeregan went off. The Trogs proved immune to the radiation and still continue to occupy portions of the city. Hideously mutated gnomes, now known as leper gnomes, claim the city as their own, ruled by the High Tinker's former advisor, Mechgineer Thermoplug. Rumor has it that an alliance between the leper gnomes and the dark iron dwarves is growing. I didn't know that last part. Hope to see how that goes. Hey, y'all, thank you so much for listening, for watching, for joining on another episode. This one's in the pipe 5x5. See you guys next time on Lore of Warcraft.